oral questions. Questions orales. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, by trying to appoint a Liberal donor and activist, Madeleine Meilleur, the Prime Minister made a mockery of a process he claimed would be open and transparent. But luckily, Madame Meilleur has better judgment than he does and has withdrawn herself from a process that has become tainted. As a provincial minister, Madame Meilleur introduced a law that required multi-party support for positions like this. Will the Prime Minister learn a lesson here and ensure that the next officer of Parliament, the Ethics Commissioner, will not be another partisan Liberal and will enjoy the all-party support in this House?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we know that Canadians need a strong, independent appointment process, and that's why we reformed to an open way the appointments process in this country. After 10 years of partisanship, excessive partisanship by the former Conservative government, we know that picking the best people for the jobs, regardless of their backgrounds, and people that reflect the full diversity of this country is what Canadians expect. That's exactly what we're delivering.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, after misleading Canadians for weeks, the Liberals finally admitted yesterday that their infrastructure bank will put taxpayers on the hook for failed projects, while the investors get all the profits. The Finance Minister claimed that there will be minimal risk to taxpayers. How reassuring. The Prime Minister also claimed that his deficits would be minimal too, but we all know how that turned out. So just how much taxpayer money is the Prime Minister willing to put on the line so that his billionaire friends get to keep all the profits?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians were very clear over the past years. They need investments in their communities, in public transit, in green infrastructure, in better housing, the kinds of things that make our communities stronger and give growth and opportunities to people both right now and into the future. That's why we put together $180 billion of investments in infrastructure, including a brand new world-class infrastructure bank that will leverage private capital to deliver even more of the infrastructure that our communities and that Canadians need. We have an ambitious plan to build this country, and we know Canadians are with us.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The leverage comes from using taxpayers' money to guarantee profits for investors, and that's not right.
The Prime Minister has to stop. Everyone understands that the infrastructure bank is going to help Liberal cronies rack up profits without worrying about any possible losses. Can he tell Canadians once and for all how much of their money he's willing to waste to line the pockets of his millionaire friends, the Right Honourable Prime Minister? Mr. Speaker, for years, Canadians have been saying that their communities need infrastructure investment. The need is striking, and that's why we set up an investment plan, $180 billion over the years to come, to create good jobs now and opportunities for Canadians for economic growth for the middle class in the future. The Infrastructure Bank is part of our ways of innovating to bring in more capital to create the infrastructure, the bridges, the public transit that Canadians need. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, Canadian parents have every right to know whether a sex offender known to the authorities is living near them. The previous Conservative government set up a plan to make that information available, but it appears the Liberals might not let parents have access to the information. That would be a very bad decision. Will the Prime Minister reassure Canadian parents that they will get access to the database? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Our priority as a government has always been to ensure the safety of families, communities, and individuals all across Canada. We will do everything we can. We will do everything that needs doing to protect our communities. When a sex offender who might be a risk is about to be released, the local police is advised, and they can advise the local population. We put our confidence in the system, and we will make sure that Canadians remain safe at home and in their communities.
Government officials have advised the Prime Minister to cancel the creation of a publicly available high-risk child sex offender database. If the Liberals have a problem with the public being informed about dangerous criminals living in their neighbourhood, then Canadian parents have a right to know. If the Prime Minister is as outraged as he claims to be, he has an opportunity right here and now to reject the advice that he's received from these officials. Will he do it, yes or no?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Public safety and the safety of our children is always a priority for this government and will continue to be because it's a priority for any government in this country. When a potential dangerous offender is about to be liberated, the local police is alerted and they can then alert the public. Canada already has a national sex offender registry, which helps ensure that offenders are properly registered and high-risk offenders are identified.
L'honorable député d'Outremont.
The honourable member for Outremont.
Satsuko Thurlow is in Parliament today. She's been a Canadian citizen for 60 years, but when she was a 13-year-old girl, on August 6, 1945, in Hiroshima, an atomic bomb wiped out most of her city and most of her family. She's made it her life work to fight against nuclear arms. Canada is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, Article 6 of which mandates that we must fight to avoid nuclear proliferation in the world. Yet last August, to our great shame, the Liberals voted against nuclear disarmament, and last March we were absent from these talks in New York. It's not too late. The talks are starting again. Will we?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, all Canadians strongly support concrete efforts towards nuclear disarmament, and we are taking meaningful steps to achieve nuclear disarmament. That means doing the hard work of actually achieving results. In 2016, for the first time ever, Canada rallied 159 different states to support and pass a resolution calling for the Fissile Material Cutoff Treaty. With the support of nuclear and non-nuclear countries, Canada is chairing this high-level group to help phase out nuclear weapons. Canada continues to lead in the fight for nuclear disarmament.
No honourable member for Outremont.
That is so Orwellian, Mr. Speaker. Canada voted last August against nuclear disarmament. We refused to take part in March. Those talks are starting again at the United Nations in a couple of weeks. The question is, will we be there, or are we going to get talking points that contradict the bare reality that the Liberal government is doing nothing on nuclear disarmament?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, as of last year, we're chairing a high-level group that actually is moving forward with the Fissile Material Cutoff Treaty. What the member opposite is talking about is an initiative that actually doesn't include the nuclear states. So you can have all sorts of people talking about nuclear disarmament, but if they don't actually have nuclear arms, it's sort of useless to have them around and talking. It's well-meaning, as the NDP often are, but we're actually taking real, tangible, concrete steps that are going to make a difference in moving towards a nuclear-free world.
Honourable member for Outremont.
All talk, no action. Le Premier Ministre.
The Prime Minister promised to legalize marijuana immediately. At the same time, he thwarted our attempts to avoid people getting a criminal record for simple possession. To us, that just seemed common sense. But the Liberals are touting recreational marijuana use while at the same time handing out criminal records. With already over 15,000 arrests since taking office, how many more criminal records is the Prime Minister going to hand out before marijuana is finally legalized? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we've always been against decriminalizing marijuana because that would do nothing to protect our young people from the effects of marijuana and nothing to take the profits away from criminals. That's why we've established, or we are going to be establishing, a system that controls and regulates the sale and production of marijuana to protect our young people and to ensure that criminals don't benefit from the industry. I understand that people are impatient, but until the law is changed, the law remains the law. The honourable member for Outremont.
The law is the law unless you're the son of a Prime Minister, of course. The Prime Minister admitted to smoking marijuana after he became a member of Parliament, Mr. Speaker, and now he's telling all other Canadians that they've got to put their pot down. Come on. 15,000 Canadians have been arrested for possession under this Prime Minister. Will he at least grant pardons for those criminal records, or is there one rule for him and his family and another rule for everybody else in Canada?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, until the law is changed, the law remains the law. We are controlling and legislating around marijuana to be able to make it more difficult for young people to access marijuana and to keep the profits out of the hands of criminals. This is an approach we're taking because the current approach is failing Canadians, is creating unfair approaches to Canadians, and is not protecting our young people.
Alors, l'honorable député de Beauport,
The honourable member for Beauport-Côte-de-Beaupré, Île d'Orléans, Charlevoix. Mr. Speaker, I just got the good news. Ms. Mayer has withdrawn her candidacy. She finally saw the light. Now, it's up to the government to revise the process so that it's truly open, apolitical, and transparent. Can the Prime Minister can he promise to consult the opposition parties so that we have an official languages commissioner who will be unanimous and will have no political affiliation? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, our appointments are based on merit. Many people have done a lot of things in their past. They've been involved in various levels, municipally, provincially, federally. They've defended official languages, both of them. Everyone in this House recognizes that Madeleine Mayer always did a great job of defending the interests of minority language communities. We will continue to look for someone who's highly qualified, and as we did this time, we will always consult the opposition parties. The honourable member for Beauport. It's all false, Mr. Speaker. First of all, they never consulted the opposition parties. Our party leaders received a letter 2 days ahead of time. I have a simple question for the Prime Minister. Will the next process be apolitical, without any partisan influence, and it will be someone other than someone who has simply donated to the Liberal Party? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, when we took office, we saw that the appointment process that the previous government had used was completely irresponsible and partisan. We set up a process for appointments that's merit-based. It reflects the diversity of Canada. We're proud that over 130 nominations and candidacies were made. Over 60% were women, 15% minority, visible minorities, 10% Indigenous. We know we have a lot of work still to do to create appointments that reflect Canada, but we're going to keep up the effort.
Did the Prime Minister really just imply that the appointment of Graham Fraser was a partisan appointment as Official Languages Commissioner? But now that we've seen the withdrawal of the partisan and botched appointment of Madeleine Mayer, we are left with an interim language commissioner and an ethics commissioner whose term is close to an end. And of course, we haven't forgotten that the ethics commissioner is currently investigating the Prime Minister. So given the Liberal Party track record on appointments, which McGuinty-Wynne Liberal can we expect Jerry Butts to appoint as ethics commissioner?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I find it humorous that the party opposite is actually criticizing on appointments because the fact of the matter is they completely botched the Supreme Court's appointment, which is so important. No Prime Minister had ever botched it as much as the previous Prime Minister had. We were pleased that we were able to do something that a lot of people said weren't possible, which is find an extraordinary Supreme Court justice from Newfoundland who was bilingual. These are the kinds of things that we look for, and we take seriously the responsibility of nominating the best possible people for the posts right across this country.
The Honourable Member for Perth Wellington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thought my question was on the Ethics Commissioner, not the Supreme Court. But with this Prime Minister, it's all socks, no action. What we are left with is an Ethics Commissioner whose term is close to an end. she is currently investigating the Prime Minister himself. Right. We have no faith that this government will nominate someone who's truly impartial and nonpartisan, who is associate officer of this Parliament. Will the Prime Minister take the advice of his own botched Official Languages Commissioner and ensure that any appointment has the support and the consent of all recognized parties in this House?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're proud of the independent nominations process that we've put in place. It is open and available for all Canadians to apply, whether it's through the extraordinary appointments we've made to the Senate or the outstanding appointment we made to the Supreme Court. We're going to continue to live up to the high expectations that Canadians have. Unfortunately, as we've seen, the members opposite like to play partisan games, but we will stay focused on merit-based appointments that look like Canada. That's what Canadians expect.
The Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, this is painful to watch. Madam Mayor just withdrew her name, confirming exactly what we have been saying all along, that she is too partisan for this appointment. Now, the Prime Minister has a choice. He can learn, he can show just a little bit of humility and say maybe he made a mistake, and he can apologize, and he can confirm that the next appointment of the Ethics Commissioner, for example, will not be a partisan appointment. Could he do that just once, show a moment of humility?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this government has been pleased to reach across the aisle to appoint special advisors, special counselors, and counsel on various things. We are pleased that we've been able to highlight the breadth of merit that is available for nominations to great positions across this government. We've refused to politicize the appointments the way the previous government used to do, and quite frankly, where the partisan yelling of the members opposite has taken us today. We recognize the extraordinary service that Madeleine Maillard has always offered to minority language communities, and we look to find someone just as qualified as she was.
Well, Opposition House Leader.
Well, in one of those appointments, namely Kim Campbell, he forgot was the Prime Minister. Exactly. So that was a big mistake. Mr. Speaker, on this appointment, the Prime Minister has embarrassed the Heritage Minister, he's embarrassed himself, and Madam Mayor has had to withdraw her name from this process. We are asking the Prime Minister for a very simple commitment, because frankly he can't be trusted on this. Will he commit to Canadians that appointments for officers of Parliament will not be political, especially the Ethics Commissioner who's investigating him at this moment?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, after 10 years of Stephen Harper's government, Canadians needed an approach that is less partisan, more based on merit, more based on...
Order. It must be Wednesday, I think. The Honourable Prime Minister has some more time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canadians know that they deserve an open nominations process based on merit that is willing to recognize the full diversity of our country. That's exactly what we're focused on. That's exactly what we're delivering for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
Yesterday, the Minister of Immigration said the government was providing funding for groups like the Inland Refugee Society of BC. That's simply not true. NGOs like the Inland Refugee Society do not get a penny from the federal government. With a 300% increase in their caseload, they're running out of basic resources, and without urgent intervention, they will have to close their doors. Will the Prime Minister support the Inland Refugee Society of BC? Yes or no? We need to do more than just to tweet about it.
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we recognize with tremendous pride how open and generous Canadians have been over the past year. Our commitment to bring in over 40,000 Syrian refugees wouldn't have been able to be done without family groups, church groups, community groups, different organizations coming together and actually creating opportunities to welcome new Canadians into their homes. We salute the hard work that all community groups do, and we look forward to working with them as we continue to demonstrate to the world that immigration is a source of strength, not a source of weakness or fear.
Hello, member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagot. Mr. Speaker, because of a labour dispute, workers in the shrimp industry in the Gaspé area have lost out on at least 6 weeks of work. Next spring, they may wind up with no earnings for weeks if the Minister of Family, Children and Social Development does nothing about it and just talks about consultation. The minister's been consulting for 18 months, but the black hole urgently needs fixing. When are the Liberals going to keep their promise and restore the 5 extra week program for seasonal workers? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, this government has demonstrated that we are always open to working with affected communities, with situations of hardship, to make sure that EI delivers security for families and regions, as we've shown last year with our assistance for Alberta and a province facing the after the price of oil plummeted. We're always willing to help communities that are going through hardship, to help them get through it. That's what we are as Canadians.
Mr. Speaker, I've asked the Prime Minister before about the appointments of the next Ethics Commissioner and Lobbying Commissioner, but the Prime Minister is running out of time to consult with the opposition parties. He is legally required to consult with the opposition, but we all know what he thinks about following the law. Since the Prime Minister will not recuse himself from selecting the next Lobbying and Ethics Commissioner, will he tell this House when he will consult with opposition parties on these appointments?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, I have recused myself from the appointment of the next Ethics and Conflict of Interest Commissioner.
A member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Yeah, he's recused himself by appointing his House Leader, who reports to him on who should be appointed as the Ethics Commissioner. It sounds a little bit mischievous to me, Mr. Speaker. We know the Prime Minister is currently being investigated by the Ethics Commissioner for breaking the law. He is failing to uphold any level of ethical standards and refuses to even acknowledge if he has met with the Ethics Commissioner. As the Commissioner's term is set to end this July, the Prime Minister has not even consulted the opposition about a viable replacement. Is the Prime Minister's plan to send the Ethics Commissioner packing without appointing a replacement so he can just walk off scot-free?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, all members in this House understand how important it is to have a strong Ethics and Conflict of Interest Commissioner. I myself have worked many times and answered many questions over the course of my career as an MP from the Ethics Commissioner, and I know that all of us in this House will always work with her, because that's part of the trust that Canadians need to have in their members of Parliament and in their government.
Now, member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, the position of Ethics Commissioner will soon be vacant, and we don't know if the Prime Minister truly intends to set up a clear and transparent process, or if he's just going to consult the list of Liberal donors to fill the vacancy. Transferring responsibility for the appointment to the Government House Leader is hardly reassuring. Mr. Speaker, do opposition parties have to make goo-goo eyes at the Prime Minister for him to consider consulting them? Or could he have the decency to do so for the sake of transparency, at risk of upsetting their generous Liberal donors? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. The appointments we make reflect the diversity and incredible talents of candidates from all over the country. 60% of people are women, 15% visible minorities, 10% Indigenous peoples. Those are the candidates in the pool. We're showing what a merit-based selection process looks like. We have always followed the rules for the procedure, and we've always consulted the opposition parties. We believe that good appointments are essential to keeping Canadians' trust in our appointments and our parliamentary institutions.
Speaker, we see an epidemic of partisan Liberal appointments happening. Jennifer Stebbins, failed Liberal candidate, got a cushy Hamilton Port Authority job. John Kubik was appointed as a judge after donating over 26 times to the Liberal Party. The new president of ACOA got his appointment for over $30,000 in Liberal donations. And now, after a nice $1,500 donation to the Liberal Party, the Infrastructure Minister appointed Jean-He Shim to the Waterfront Toronto Board of Directors. When will the Prime Minister stop these blatant partisan patronages and start serving all Canadians rather than just the Liberal inside?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we believe on this side of the House that previous partisan affiliation is not a barrier to being appointed to important posts, whether they were former Liberals or even the fact that the President of the Treasury Board was a former Progressive Conservative. We recognize that Canadians have dedication to their country and service that we thoroughly recognize and respect. We will continue to make nominations based on merit, based on reflecting the full diversity of our extraordinary country.
Order. Alors, l'honorable député de...
The Honourable Member for Longueuil, Saint-Hubert. Mr. Speaker, a year and a half ago, the Liberals promised us a non-partisan appointment process for the CBC Board of Directors. In May of 2016, a whole year ago, the Minister of Heritage said that she was going to unveil her new process in the coming weeks. That's what she said. We learned yesterday that soon half of the seats on the board will be empty on the board of CBC. And what did the office say? Well, they said it's coming soon, but we have no date. A year, we're starting to doubt that it's coming. We need a competent board for CBC, not just Stephen Harper's buddies and not the buddies of the Liberals either. So let's take politics out of the CBC board. When's that going to happen? In weeks, months, or should we just forget it? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Our government is very proud of having kept our promise to reinvest massively in the present and future of CBC Radio-Canada. We recognize that after having been politicized with partisan appointments for too long, we need to make the right choices for CBC Radio-Canada so that it can be managed in an independent way. It's essential that we have independent, free media in our democracy, and that is exactly what we are going to do. We're going to ensure we have the right people in the right places.
For Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, speaking of keeping promises, last week I questioned the Minister of the Environment on the stern warnings issued by UNESCO that Canada could lose World Heritage Site designation for wood buffalo unless all of the directives are met, including engaging impacted Indigenous peoples. She responded that she had initiated those consultations. How then does the government explain that the Mikisew Cree First Nation, who initiated the review, are still waiting? Whatever happened to the Prime Minister's commitment to a nation-to-nation relationship?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no relationship is more important to this government than the one with First Nation, with Indigenous peoples across this country, and that's why we take so seriously the responsibility of consulting and working hand in hand on a broad range of issues. On the issue of UNESCO and Wood Buffalo Park, we take that very seriously. We look forward to working with local communities, with stakeholders and with partners to ensure that we continue to preserve this extraordinary place for decades and generations to come.
Honourable Member for Pontiac. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I was proud to vote with my colleagues from all parties to reaffirm our support for the Paris Agreement. I would particularly like to salute the vast majority of the Conservative opposition who acknowledged that climate change is a global problem that requires a global solution. Despite the withdrawal of the United States, Canada must continue to work to implement the Paris Accord because it's in the interest of all Canadians. Can the Prime Minister please update this House on Canada's commitment to the Paris Accord? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to thank the Honourable Member for Pontiac for his question and for his work fighting for the environment. I was very happy yesterday to see the vast majority, almost all of the Conservative Party, accept that climate change is real, and I'm really looking forward to seeing to what extent they will have a concrete plan to deliver. They don't want a carbon price? Well, I'm looking forward to seeing their plan to meet the Paris targets because they don't like our plan.
Member for Niagara Falls.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're seeing reports that the government is considering stopping public access to the National Sex Offender Registry. Now, we're all familiar with the Liberal record with regards to vulnerable Canadians. They voted against the recent motion to support people living with autism. And they voted against Wynn's law, whose only purpose was to protect innocent Canadians. That's why we want to know if the government is now prepared to keep secret from the public that dangerous and high-risk sex offenders are living in their neighbourhood. So my question to the Prime Minister is straightforward. Does he believe Canadians have the right to know, yes or no?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the security and safety of Canadians in their communities, of our families, of our homes is a priority for this government, as it is a priority for every single person who serves in this House. We recognize that it's important that we keep people informed. That's why local police are always informed when people are released, and they can then alert the local population. We recognize how important this is as an issue, and we will always do everything we can to keep our communities safe.
The Honourable Member for Niagara Falls.
I don't understand why this concept is so difficult, Mr. Speaker. The registry was created by the Conservative government, and it was there to give the public information they need to remain safe. Now, I can appreciate that the subject of victims, innocent Canadians, is not a priority for this government, but nonetheless, I'm hoping that the Prime Minister will look at this and say, regardless of the Liberal record in this area, we must and should protect our children. So, will the Prime Minister do the right thing, yes or no? Canadians deserve to know.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I know Canadians are always disappointed to see political parties play the worst kind of crass political games with an issue that is so serious for Canadians. The Conservatives tabled legislation but didn't put any money towards it. They actually didn't bother actually delivering on it, as is so much of that previous government. It was all smoke and mirrors. It was all talking a big game, not actually delivering. We are focused on concretely keeping our communities safe, giving police the tools necessary to keep our communities safe. That's what we're going to do, and we're not playing crass political games with that.
Order. I'm having trouble hearing the answers. Let's hear this question. The Honourable. We could have a shorter question period if that's what members want. Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
For the past 2 days, the Liberals have refused to clear the air about whether they plan to cancel a publicly accessible registry for high-risk sex offenders, canceling a tool for parents to keep their kids safe. So let me provide the Prime Minister with another opportunity to clear the air. Are the Liberals planning to cancel this registry for high-risk sex offenders? Yes or no?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives tabled legislation for this initiative, but didn't actually put any money forward on this. Canada already has a national sex offender registry, which helps ensure that offenders are properly registered and high-risk offenders are identified. No one in this House believes that we should do anything but keep our communities and our children totally safe, and that this Conservative Party continues to play the worst kind of political games with it is part of why people are so cynical about their approaches to politics.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Les Etchemins, Lévis. Mr. Speaker, when I was Conservative Public Safety Minister, I resisted bureaucrats who were opposed to the creation of a public registry of high-risk sexual predators. Today, that registry is the law. And today, these same bureaucrats want to gut the registry. Our Conservative government stood up to them in the interests of all Canadians. My question is very simple, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister and his minister stand up and apply the law and stand up for victims and families instead of just going along to get along with their bureaucrats? The Honourable Prime Minister. Yes, this government will always be there to defend the interests and safety of Canadians. We will do everything that we can to keep Canadians safe. We will do everything that we can to ensure that our police forces have the tools they need. And to suggest that there's a party in this House that is not concerned about the safety of our children is really just irresponsible and crass politics. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, after the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the Liberals are now going after the powers of the Commissioner of Competition. In 2011, the Commissioner blocked an agreement between Air Canada and United Airlines because their agreement would have demolished competition and increased fees and costs for passengers. With C-49, a minister will be able to approve alone these same agreements, and as if by magic, Air Canada and United Airlines are going to table exactly the same plan. If the Commissioner disapproves of this merger again, will the Prime Minister ask the Minister to listen to the Commissioner, or will they once again bend before the interests of Air Canada? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we were elected on a platform to protect the interests of Canadians and to create growth for the middle class and all those working hard to join it. We will always look at every situation from that point of view, and we will protect consumers' interests. That's what people expect of us. That's what we will always do.
A member for Windsor West.
Mr. Speaker, thousands of Canadians have been receiving shakedown demands from internet trolling companies using the notice and notice regime to make unsubstantiated allegations of internet piracy. Canadians scared by the notice pay the demands without ever being found guilty. The Minister has already acknowledged that these scare tactics have no force of law, but he needs to take real action. When will this government fix this by changing the regulations, stopping the shakedown? And if Prime Minister does not know the answer or does not understand it, please defer to someone that does, because I want action for Canadians. They need it now.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, keeping Canadians safe both in reality and online is something that is a priority for this government. We look forward to working with partners to ensure that we're defending the rights and the financial security of vulnerable Canadians. We will continue to work hard on this file to make sure that Canadians are safe both online and in their communities.
Honourable Member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastern.
Mr. Speaker, Liberal action, I really should say Liberal inaction, speaks louder than Liberal words. The Prime Minister has yet again punted key spending for our brave men and women in uniform down the road until after the next election. Essentially, they're giving the Canadian Armed Forces an IOU, and of course, nobody trusts these Liberals. When will the Prime Minister take real action on national defence and not punt spending down the road until after the next election, when the leader of the official opposition becomes our Prime Minister?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I'm incredibly proud of the extraordinary work that our Minister of Defence did on the Defence Policy Review, recognizing, first of all, that for 10 years under the previous government, the men and women of the Canadian Forces were used as political props but underinvested in. The previous government announced a lot of things, didn't put the kind of money forward in stable, long-term, predictable ways, and that's exactly what we've done. We've recognized that the men and women of the Canadian Forces deserve a government that truly supports them in deeds as well as in words, and that's what today's historic announcement was all about.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, earlier today the Minister of Defence claimed that he had our soldiers' best interests at heart, but that was just a masquerade. The majority of the funding that's been promised isn't coming until the next decade. The crumbs promised for the next few years are below the savage cuts of the last two budgets. And they're using creative accounting to make us believe that spending as a percentage of GDP is going up. Our men and women in uniform need more resources now. Why does this Prime Minister seem completely unable to understand that? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, for 10 years, our men and women in uniform have been waiting for resources in place of the empty words of the previous government, and that is why we are ensuring that our men and women in uniform get exactly what they need, and we will deliver, whether that be with the money that's necessary for ships, the money for the air fleet of 88 new jets. We are making the necessary investments that the previous government simply did not want to make.
Member for Carleton.
Division 18 of the government's budget bill empowers the finance minister to approve loan guarantees to infrastructure mega projects through the new $35 billion infrastructure bank. I asked him 8 times at committee who would pay for the losses in the event that such a project or its builder went under. He couldn't answer and didn't know. Can the Prime Minister tell the House who will pay for the losses in the event that a loan guarantee-backed project goes under?
Honourable Prime Minister.
I can understand the difficulty that the members opposite have with the concept of an infrastructure bank, because for 10 years they didn't look at investments in infrastructure. They didn't look at innovative ways to actually deliver for Canadians the public transit, the social infrastructure, the green infrastructure that Canadians need. Our historic investments are going to be...
Order. Allowed.
The honourable member for Lac Saint-Jean, I know, wants to hear the answer. Everyone in the House of Commons wants to hear the questions and the answers. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Our historic investments in infrastructure will allow us to make good jobs right now for the middle class and growth over the long term. We know that we need to invest in our communities and our future, and that's exactly what Canadians have asked us to do. That's what we are doing.
Honourable member for Ottawa West Nepean.
Mr. Speaker, in her speech yesterday, the Minister of Foreign Affairs outlined Canada's recommitment to the international forums that have provided peace and stability for the past 70 years. Canada is a proud member of many international institutions, and next year we will have the G7 presidency. Can the Prime Minister please tell this House how the objectives outlined yesterday, including Canada's commitment to multilateral forums, will strengthen our position in the world and provide an opportunity to promote the Canadian values of diversity, inclusion and openness?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as Canadians, we believe in diversity, in openness and in inclusion. We will work towards a better world because that's what Canadians do. Multilateralism and collaboration are key to the challenges we're facing. With our allies, we will seek to bring peace, stability and prosperity to all corners of the globe. We believe in a progressive trade agenda. We believe in fighting climate change. We believe in putting gender equality at the forefront of all our efforts, particularly in development, and we will always promote and defend Canadian values on the world stage.
A member for Edmonton-Wetaskiwin.
Mr. Speaker, in his rambling justification of his vote against the Canadian Autism Partnership, the Liberal House Leader's parliamentary secretary said this: I disagree with members who say that it is 10 cents a day for this or it is only $19 million. I can assure you that every one of the constituents I represent would argue that $1 million is a lot of money. He'll get no argument from this side on that last point. But as this Liberal Prime Minister racks up a deficit over 25,000 times that $1 million, how is it possible that Canadians living with autism were left behind?
Honourable Prime Minister. Prime Minister.
We recognize that autism spectrum disorder has a significant and lifelong impact on individuals and on their families. Federal investments in research, data improvements, surveillance and training skills are supporting those with autism and their families. There is an extraordinary network of stakeholders across the country raising awareness and providing services to families. Our government will continue to support those efforts through our programs.
Honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, volunteers in my riding are in the middle of a massive community-led cleanup of Clayoquot Sound. Without any government support, Clayoquot Cleanup has raised $75,000 to tackle 600 tons of marine debris along the west coast of Vancouver Island. Yesterday, at the United Nations Conference on Oceans, we were warned that the amount of plastic in our oceans could soon outweigh fish. On the eve of World Oceans Day, where is this government's plan to clean up marine debris along our coasts? And will the Prime Minister provide immediate support for the cleanup on Vancouver Island?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, last year we put forward historic investments in our oceans with our Oceans Protection Plan, recognition that Canada must have world-leading response and protection for our coasts. We have the longest coastline in the world, Mr. Speaker, and it's high time a Canadian government took seriously the responsibility of protecting and supporting it. That's what this government is doing after too many years of inaction, particularly by the previous government. We are moving forward to protect our coasts and the people who make a living along them.
The honourable member for Marc-Aurèle Fortin. Mr. Speaker, today our government announced its new defense policy. It's our duty to support our men and women who are at the heart of the Canadian Armed Forces to ensure that our forces can courageously serve Canada. Can the Prime Minister please inform this House about the details of this new defense policy, particularly the measures to support families? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, families are the strength behind the uniform, and they are essential to the success of our armed forces. That's why, Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to improve the support that we're offering to the families of our armed forces members and to ensure that they have adequate access to resources. We are going to provide $6 million additional per year to modernize support programs for the families of members, such as the resource centers for families, to offer better support for families when our forces are on mission. We must always remember that behind each uniform, there's a family.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister even know that in addition to the vast majority of Canada's autism community, the Canadian Autism Partnership has received overwhelming support from every part of this country? The Canadian Association for Community Living, UNICEF Canada, Plan Canada, Save the Children Canada, World Vision Canada, Global Citizen, Haley Wickenheiser, Elliot Friedman, and many, many more. Conservative, NDP, and Green members were unanimous in our support for Canadians living with autism, and yet every single Liberal but one voted against the partnership. Could the Prime Minister please explain this decision?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, through the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, the Government of Canada has invested more than $39 million in autism research over the past 5 years. This investment contributes to providing the research evidence needed for the development of new tools and treatments for those suffering from autism. We recognize the challenges families are going through, and we stand ready to support them.
The Honourable Member for Bécancour, Nicolette Sorel. Mr. Speaker, to start, I would like to note that the Prime Minister has never risen to answer a single question from the Bloc Québécois. That's a flagrant lack of respect from this Prime Minister for the 1 million Quebecers that we represent. This attitude, it's the same attitude that we've seen in his refusal to have a dialogue with Premier Couillard on Quebec's place in Canada. Will the Prime Minister apologize for his government's constant lack of respect for Quebec's legitimate demands? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I've spent a huge amount of time meeting with Quebecers, as I meet with all Canadians, to speak with them about their priorities and to hear about their priorities. They talk about growth for the middle class. They are talking about jobs for the future for their children. They talk to me about the environment, about Canada's role in the world. They don't talk to me about the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, this government was elected on a clear promise to listen to Canadians' priorities. That's exactly what we're going to do.